Yep. So we've been discussing Senate Bill 2, the school voucher legislation that recently passed. The bill creates an education savings account, or EAS, which would allow parents to use $10,000 of public funds per student toward private school tuition. If the House approves the voucher bill, it will head back to the Senate. And so we're curious, what type of effect would this bill have on the state of education here in Texas? And joining us now is Josh Cowen, a professor of education policy at Michigan State University. He explores how tax-funded school voucher programs have damaged education equity and how education privatization is failing students and exasperating income inequality. In his recent book, The Private Tiers, How Billionaires Created a Culture War and Sold School Vouchers. Josh, welcome to Hello Houston.
Appreciate you having me.
Josh, it's great to have you with us. I want to remind our audience, if you have any questions about this topic and want to join the conversation, 713-440-8870. Josh, let me just start with, before we get into the rich history of all of this, where are we at in the state of Texas right now after what's happened overnight? How are you feeling about where we're going?
So unfortunately, it's a bad day for Texas kids and families. I mean, these voucher bills, the vast majority of vouchers go to kids who are already in private school. So if you're in private school today, your parents may be getting a check at some point in the next couple of years. For about the 25% or so of voucher users who do transfer from public to private schools, they're mostly only able to find access to schools that are subprime, not particularly great. Test scores tend to show that, and it becomes just another way to privatize what's been a long-standing public investment in communities and families.
I want to remind folks that the number here, 713-440-8870, if you'd like to join the conversation.
Hey, Josh, it's Frank Billingsley. So a voucher program, which is what we're talking about in Texas, very different than an education savings account. Can you explain?
Actually, they're the same thing. So an education savings account is just one type of voucher.
Well, my understanding is an ESA goes straight to the parents and can be used for more than just tuition, whereas a voucher program goes to the school.
No, historically, it's been a mix of both. The key piece here is the private school tuition piece. You do hear a lot of messaging from the voucher lobby trying to make a big distinction between the two, but ESAs are not vouchers, like hammers aren't tools. ESAs are one type of voucher. The fact that parents can spend money on things other than tuition is certainly a newer flavor of these things. But the key, the private school tuition piece, still makes up the vast majority of spending of taxpayers in these types of situations.
We had a caller on a few moments ago, and she started her call by saying that in other states, vouchers have been successful, but she wasn't in favor of the one here in Texas. Is there truth to that?
I'm not sure of what measure you would use to call vouchers successful, unless the measure is, are we going to give taxpayer dollars to existing private school families? If that's your standard, then certainly vouchers have done a good job providing subsidies for existing choices already.
So, Josh, you have mentioned how the measurement of voucher programs in other states have not been successful. Given that information, why do you think Governor Abbott would want to pass school vouchers or this program?
Well, I don't know what's in these folks' hearts and minds, but I do know that there are a handful of billionaires that have been spending a lot of money in Texas and in other states to get this thing done. The pattern that you saw in Texas with a Pennsylvania-based billionaire named Jeff Yass spending heavily in your state, Betsy DeVos from my home state, billionaire there, the Koch organizations, they have done this in every other state that's passed vouchers in the last 3 years: Arkansas, Iowa, Louisiana, Tennessee most recently. And it's the same approach each time. It's spend a lot of money heavily in Republican primaries to get out rural Republicans who oppose these things, because there aren't any private schools in rural communities for kids to use. And it's taken a little more time in Texas, but that same playbook that they followed elsewhere seems to have borne some fruit here in Texas.
Hey, Josh, I have a concern that if the state is putting money into private schools, which this is what's going to happen, that the state will then have a piece of it, that they'll be able to influence what is taught in those schools, what students can go to those schools, what teachers can be accredited or not accredited, what books are in the library, DEI policy, transgender policy. It's almost like what you see with Trump and Harvard right now, saying, if you don't do what I say, we're not going to give you this voucher.
No, that's a good point. That's a good example of what, the current legislation that passed does provide language that says that private schools still get to do the choosing. It's, that's the big misnomer is that this gives parents the choice. It actually still gives the private schools the ability to choose their students. But otherwise, it also says, the state can't interfere with what private schools want to do. Well, that's true for the current legislation, but we're seeing with Trump and these colleges right now, and administrations change, and presidents come and go. And so certainly once you start to take taxpayer subsidies, you do have to be prepared at times to make some adjustments if you run afoul with what whoever's in charge doesn't like. And you're seeing this play out with Trump and these colleges right now. Same thing could happen in Texas private schools.
We are speaking with Josh Cowen, who is the author of Privateers, How Billionaires Create a Culture War and Sold School Vouchers. We're interested in what you think, your comments, thoughts, even questions for Josh. Give us a call, 713-440-8870.
Josh, you mentioned earlier that 25% of students actually move from public school to private school. Of those 25% that make that jump, do we know how many are actually come from low-income families or actually have some kind of disability?
Well, in the old days, the answer used to be all of them because they made very firm caps on who could use these programs. But that has not existed in the more recent programs. The typical voucher user today is wealthier than students in their counties. They are more likely to be white, and they're more likely to have no special needs assignments to them. It's true that the Texas bill creates an eligibility list to try to change some of that, to give money first to lower-income kids and then special education kids and so on. But it doesn't change the fundamental issue of which is that the private schools get to do the choosing. So it's not enough to simply say, well, we're going to give these kids the money. You have to find a place for them to spend it, and that's the real issue, and that's the thing that keeps these from being really used heavily by lower-income families.
We have a call from Ivana Moore from the Heights. Ivana, what's your question for Josh?
Actually, it was more of a comment than a question, but thank you so much for this wonderful discussion and platform. And thank you for allowing all kinds of expressions on this complicated topic. For me, as a teacher and a promoter of the arts, I have encountered in the last 3 years students that I teach with great potential and brilliance. But unfortunately, they live in areas where, of course, they are subject to the public schools. And the public schools, as we well know, in the poor areas are not as efficient and as prioritized as other areas. So many of these parents, I teach 2 classes of 18 children, and we have about 800 and something children registered in our program at the Christ the King Catholic Church on Main Street in the Heights, and it's primarily Hispanic families, lower income. Well, they have expressed the great desire of being able to send their children to a school that would be appropriate for their, faith and for their academic potential. And so many of them that I've just discussed with a little bit, they, would like to have the possibility of, if not a voucher, something that would allow them a little bit more freedom and to be able to, you can transfer to other schools, that's true, you can apply and transfer, but it's not an easy process. And,
Ivana, I'm going to jump in right here because we only have Josh for so long, but I appreciate your thoughts on this topic. Josh, let me ask you this. One of the stories that goes around when we talk about school vouchers is that it will end up depleting the funding for public schools. It will harm public schools. Those in favor of vouchers say, oh, no, it's spreading the wealth around. What's the reality here?
Yeah, so the reality is, at the end of the day, states can't afford to pay for two sectors of education. And so where the real hit to taxpayers comes is at the state level. And the state's a really important part of this funding because, as your caller suggested, some of the public schools in many outlying areas, rural areas, higher poverty areas, they don't have a lot of a tax base or a wealth base to draw on their own public funds. So the state money is a really important equalizer for them, and it's an important source of inequality when that doesn't happen, as has been the case in Texas. When you commit to paying the tuition of kids already in private school, which is what this voucher bill does, it puts a real strain on state taxpayer dollars, not just in the public schools, but you've seen in places like Arizona, roads funding, funding for corrections facilities, funding for water quality, things like that. States can't afford, in the long run, two sectors of education. Right now, the $1 billion price tag on your voucher bill is manageable for current taxpayers. But when that creeps up to 8, 9, 10 billion, as some of the estimates I've seen will do in the next 3 or 4 years, that's where the check's really going to come due.
Hey, Josh, do you know of any caps on tuitions for private schools? In other words, if I charge $30,000 for your kid and now you're going to get 10, and I say, well, you know what? I'm going to charge 40 because you're getting 10 and I want your 30 anyway. But now we've defeated the whole point. We've just made the school richer.
100%. So in the states that have passed these things recently or expanded them, like Arizona or Iowa, you've actually seen private schools hiking tuition up.
There you
as
go.
a result of that behavior. Now, in the old days, I don't want to sound like I keep referring to that, but that was a problem that was really well understood by good faith folks who tried to get this right, and they did put tuition caps and they did prohibit that kind of behavior. But all bets have been off for really the last 3 or 4 years, and so this is why you see these private schools jacking tuition up. They're allowed to.
Yeah.
You know, I have a question about this from the opposite point of view. Is there an example or a story you can illustrate where vouchers have benefited the community? Is there a place where they figured out this concept and made it work?
So there are a handful of studies from Florida that have shown that when you threaten public school communities with loss of funding due to the voucher program, you've seen some very tiny upticks in the average test scores of those public schools. It tend to be lower income public schools. Now, that's something that gets pointed out a lot by the pro-voucher side, including in the debate in your state. The problem is it's about 3 times less than simply investing the impact in simply investing that money directly in the public school. So if your policy goal is to improve public schools, and God knows we have to make some improvements in our public schools, the simplest way to do that is to actually directly invest in them. It's like in very few other sort of debates or discussions would we say the best way to improve a product's quality is to simply just transfer dollars out of that area. And in any event, you have to kind of reflect at the end of the day, and this comes down to a choice in values. I don't accept the value proposition that threatening vulnerable communities with funding loss and pitting them against each other for scarce resources is moral or ethical public policy. I just don't think we should do it.
You're listening to Hello Houston. We are currently talking about school vouchers with Josh Cowen, and we have a call on the line. Daniel from East Houston. Hi, Daniel. What is your question or comment?
Yes, I would like to know, where did the $10,000 figure come from, since the state amounts that for each district per student does not even come close to that?
That's a good question. Do you? I have no idea. Do you?
Yeah, Josh, what do you think?
So the voucher dollar amount varies across states. The bill language in your state is very similar to what's been used in other states. I don't know the exact answer. Usually it's pegged to some percentage of the public school investment and or some thought process on what the state can afford in the first year. It didn't come from nowhere, but it's for our purposes, it's more or less arbitrary.
Does seem rather random, yeah.
I'm also curious, and we may have addressed this at least on other times we've talked about the topic, but to get your point of view, when it comes to testing and holding schools accountable, there seems to be a very certain set of accountability for public schools that wouldn't necessarily translate to the private schools. Once the vouchers are in place, does that then shift at all?
No. So the private schools do, under the new legislation that got passed last night, the private schools have to take a standardized test, but they don't have to take the state standardized test. And the reason that distinction matters is that under this current really lack of accountability framework, parents are not going to be able to know whether their child is doing any better on an academic subject relative to where the kid was last year if they did leave public schools. And they're not going to be able to answer the question, how would my kid be doing this year if they had stayed in public schools? Only if the private schools had to take the same exam would we see that.
Hey, Josh, to Ernie's line of questioning here, is there any example you know of where the school system said or the state said, okay, you know what, this didn't work. We're going to take that money back or scale it back to some degree and put those funds maybe back into public education?
Yeah, so two states. One state, Illinois, sunsetted its voucher-like system last year. And then in Nebraska, they had yet to get it off the ground, but voters actually repealed the voucher law before it could take place as a quirk of Nebraska's lawmaking. Vouchers have never survived a statewide ballot initiative. They only have come to be law went through this legislative backroom wrangling that you saw last night in Texas. So two states, Illinois pulled it back after having it in place for 5 years, and then Nebraska voters actually eliminated the law themselves before the voucher bill could actually take effect.
Josh, thank you so much for chatting with us today. Before we let you go, what do you see in your crystal ball for the future of this here in Texas?
So unfortunately, I think, again, this is good news. If you're already in private school, you're on the wealthier side of your community, and your family wants that subsidy. This is going to be a boon for you. It's not good news if you're a family in public schools, committed to your public school community, and wants to make it work there, perhaps with some new investments and improvements.
Josh Cowen is a professor of education policy at Michigan State University and the author of The Privateers, How Billionaires Created a Culture War and Sold School Vouchers. Josh, thanks so much for joining us.
I appreciate you.